So yeah, I'm going to jump right in because, as you've heard, one of my favorite subjects is that intersection where design and development meets. Doesn't make me such a popular guest at parties, but you know, you might be interested in all of that. So when I say that, the first thing, as Vitaly also mentioned, is that people go, oh, that's great. Just tell me about the handoff. I want the handoff. What do I have to do in my Figma file? I can throw it over and I can get on with my life. But it's not what we're going to do today. Instead of handing off, we want to talk a little more about the understanding of. Because what happens a lot is that as designers and developers, we think we're talking about the same thing, but we have fundamentally different mental models. And one area where that happens a lot is when we talk about layout, especially, as you will see, when we talk something like a grid. So what I want to do today is I want to go with you through all of those beauties. I know the stuff that dreams are made of. I can see you already at the edge of your seat, but don't worry, it's not going to be painful. So it's going to be, what we want to do is we want to understand those concepts as designers, and for the developers, I want to show you what we can and cannot do as designers in our UI tools, which will make it much clearer while some of these frictions sometimes happen. Can I have the slides? Is usually the next question people come up with. Yes, you can. There are some further resources I'll refer to and some more in-depth things. You find it all here. I'm going to put that up at the very end of the talk again, so you have half an hour to make up your mind if you want to scan that code. I hope you will. So we're going to start this as more like a story of our everyday life. So once upon a time, there was a designer. And this was a really good designer. How do you identify a good designer? They're generally dressed all in black. And they constantly doubt their own ability. Now, you're laughing, but this is really important. If you ever meet a designer that says, I think I did a really good job on that project, take your files and run. Don't let them anywhere close your Figma file. So this designer, as I said, was a good designer. So this designer was supposed to prepare our design for development, and this designer knew it wasn't only about the pretty picture. So the design was set up in components, there was a working hierarchy, there were variables, there were spacing systems, things were thought through, different screen sizes, grids. So all we had to do is press that share button and then share it with the rest. And this is where the story really begins. And now, like all big stories, you know, there is an original document where these things are written down, they're passed on to generation. Think about Othello, think about War and Peace. You know, there is this original place where the truth is held. And we also have that Slack channel. So our design is in the Slack channel, and here we start. So here's the link for the web design, which includes all the necessary information for coding. We're sending that off. And we say, I'll be away for an extended weekend. Feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Developer typing. This is a dangerous moment. Great, I'll have a look and get going. That was easy. Fine, designer know, did it all by the book, getting off, having that weekend I deserve, until... Hey, there are some problems with the design. You said to reach out any time. Now, you know, that's true. Designers do that a lot because we're people pleasers, but you might get the response you deserve if you just reach out any time. So, of course, always happy to chat. Just heads up, I'll be opting for a different layout approach, as the 12-column grid is a bit outdated. Okay, so what are you going to be using instead? Well, just the usual CSS layout stuff like Flexbox and so on. And now, as a designer, you know you have two ways that this could go. You can do the one that you sort of want to do, which is, sure, just go for it, and you know you're going to be upset for the next week because your design and the browser, there's absolutely no alignment. Or you know what you should do. You should say, I don't know what that means. But it's a bit tricky because as designers, we spend so much time learning this, we're so dedicated to our work. We're experts in this field, so owning up in your expertise that you sort of don't know how something gets built to the development team sometimes feels like you're facing this. And in your head, you have all of this. But if you change that chip in your head, you know, it's also about the approach. Then what you a lot of the time find on the other hand is more like this. So yeah, this is how I see developers, and that's lovely. So if your developers tell you, if you don't know what that means, do you want me to explain you? Then you jump in and you say, yes, I would absolutely love that. And you can even return the favor. So let's do that. So that's the moment where I usually bring in a skilled front-end developer that's going to explain all of these concepts to us. Times are difficult, budgets are tight, really hate people fiddling with my slides, so I'm just going to explain that to you instead. So CSS Flexbox, let's jump into the first one. What is it? So as a designer, I can move all my things on the canvas, and this is how I design. I can make decisions really fast by moving designs. And this is, for me, also the fundamental difference. And when people say, well, why don't we just jump in the browser and do it all there? Because this is so fast, and this is so creative, and you can do all of these things. This is a really important part of designing. But once we move to the browser, it doesn't work like this. Things are stacked per default below one another. And we need tools like CSS Flexbox that we can arrange these elements and create our design. So let's understand this with a very simplified example. What happens is we have item A, B, and C, and per default they're stacked below one another. What we can do, we can create a container around that, and we can call the rule display flex, and it turns it into something called a flex container. And now the flex container is going to send rules to those children. So it's very important to understand the relationship between the parent and the children here. So the parent is the container, and then everything directly inside, that's the child element. And the parent sets all the family rules. So it's all the same rules for all the children, and they follow it really nicely. Only works in the browser. Boy, did I try. So what the rules that can happen is the alignment. So it's horizontal, vertical, it's the spacing between things, it's the alignment within that box. And as you can see, all of them do the same thing here. Now, Flexbox is all about democratic parenting. I should really put that in the specs. Because what I mean by that is we have those overall rules, but those children, they also, within those rules, have their own freedom. So what they can do is you look at the children, they're called the flex items, and we can decide how they use up the space that they're given. So they can be fixed, they can be a percentage, or they can be something called flex. So that means they use up the rest of the available space. And in a very simplified example, like a card, you can see that the card is our flex box, there's one direction, all same padding, all same spacing for all, and you can see the items inside, how they're using up this different space. Now, if we have more complex elements, like this example here, then it's just going to be nested into one another, but it's all the same rules. So we have a parent giving the rules to the child, so that child looks up to its direct parent, but that parent is a child of someone else, looking up to its own parent. And this parent, like the grandparent, is not going to ever get involved with the grandchildren. They're all like closed little families within each other. So you have Flexbox within Flexbox and Flexbox, and this is how you can build those designs. So it's all about nesting. You can set up your components like this. You can group them to larger elements. And you can even set up entire pages using all of this. And the great thing about that is that these pages, they resize really nicely because of the nature of Flexbox. Now a designer listens to all of that carefully and says, this is amazing because you know what? I have that in Figma. I have auto layout. And this is literally just auto layout, what you explained to me. I never knew. I mean, I could have looked into dev mode where it says flex everywhere and asked, but, you know, it was just a weird term I saw. So how this works, it's 3 pillars, and it works the same principle. We have auto layout menu, resize, and nesting, and that translates to container properties, item properties, and nesting. So let's have a look. So if we look at the container properties, which is our layout, which is our menu, then you can see I have the alignment, I have the direction, and I have all the positioning, and all child items, direct children, follow all of these rules perfectly. If we have a look at the resize menu, then this is literally our item properties. What we get in Figma is a little different. We have fixed, we have fill container, and we have hug content. So let's look at an example. Fixed, as the name says, is a fixed size. Fill the container is like flex, it uses up the rest of the available space. And hug, that's the default also in Flexbox, that's literally like hugging the content. And as that changes, you can see that it looks also at the other siblings and the space that you give it. It's not aligned 100%, so we don't have percentage in Figma. And as we only have fill container, which translates to flex, we have only flex 1. So we can't set another flex value, which is a bit annoying because we can't align with the real thing that much. The nesting, this is usually where all this confusion about auto layout happens. So what happens is you have this element, and then you just click the auto layout button, and then it all falls apart. And this is because you're designing and you're having everything on one layer. And this is good because you're in the design process. You don't want to have all this complicated setup and nesting yet. You want to be free, you want to design, you want to explore. But once you're ready to go and tidy up, have components, have auto layout components, then you're going to run through this. And you're going to have to think about all these little families, all these little elements, how do they work, and how do they interact and behave when I change the size. And once you've done that, once you've cleaned up all of that, then it's going to work once you press that button, and your components are going to be responsive. Now, there's a great feature that was recently released, because that's a lot of stuff to do by hand. So what you can do is you can right-click, and then you get a little suggest auto layout menu, and if you click that, it's going to help you in the background, and it's going to learn from what you do, and it's going to do the nesting for you. It's really tempting as a beginner to jump into that right away. I would still really, really recommend that you understand nesting, because this is what's happening in the browser later. Understand why these things happen and why some things don't work. And just like we can with Flexbox in the browser, we can set up Flexbox very close to Flexbox designs with Figma. So we did that. Our designer, our developer, they talk together. They're completely aligned. And now we have a new person entering the stage. Say hello to the project manager. Right, we're back in our Slack channel. Our developer did all the work. It's looking all pretty. And our project manager says, thanks, but why do the cards shuffle so strangely here when I resize them? Can you fix that? Designer goes back to the file. Panic. I tried everything. I put that off fill, and it doesn't work. And if otherwise they're fixed, then I don't know what to do. But we're friends with the developer now, so we can just reach out. No worries. We just need CSS Grid. Flexbox is a one-dimensional layout tool, and we need 2 dimensions. Absolutely no idea what that means. So let's have a look at CSS Grid. So our developer is going to give us a brief overview again. Let's first go back to looking at Flexbox. So in Flexbox, we have something called wrap. So you can set this to wrap. You can do that in Figma as well. And it's going to wrap into a new line. But it's going to take every item one by one. So depending on the space, and then it's just going to put it into a new line. And this is called a one-dimensional layout. It's looking at one axis only. So it's going to be like this. It doesn't care what's happening in the first line. It doesn't know. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you want something else, if you want something like this, then you need a different CSS tool. So you need a 2-dimensional layout tool looking at 2 axes, and that is CSS Grid. It's not about one or the other. It's 2 different tools doing 2 different things. So if you think of CSS Grid like beads on a string, then if you think of Flexbox like bead on the strings, then with CSS Grid, you're taking those beads out and you're putting them into a bento box. And this is a really great bento box. You can join compartments, you can enlarge it. It's really powerful. And this now is the critical part. So if you take away one thing, then please take away this one. As designers, when I say grid, you think of that. You think of pink little lines, and we put our components in there. There are 200 Medium articles about that, how to do that, how to space that, and this is how it works. But when you say grid to a developer, then usually that's a CSS grid. And a CSS grid, that's a container, but it's made up of grid lines. And there is a fundamental difference if you have these columns or these lines. What the lines do is they create some sort of coordinate system. And that is much more powerful because that lets me place items inside. So per default, they're going to look like this. But I can target these cells. And I can also join these cells. And I can even make overlaps. So you can think if I take away that grid, then that is much more powerful. That doesn't have much to do with these rigid columns that we're thinking of. You can create columns, just as you always did. They don't have to be the same size. There is a new unit that we can use, which is called the fractional unit. And what the fractional unit does, it's a bit like Flex. So we can use fractions of the space that's left. And you can divide them up how you wish. And as they're fractions, with changing screen size, they adapt really nicely. So you can mix and match. I'm only going to touch like the base of grid. Like CSS Grid is very, very powerful. There are subgrids. There's so much to it. So we're just going to get a really brief overview. What I want to point out is the difference between an explicit grid which is what we looked at. And again, this is for designers really easy to grasp. It's like, I'm making this layout, I'm using this layout. But there is also an implicit grid. So that means you're literally giving your items to the browser, and the browser is creating this grid for you, which is a very strange idea as a designer. So I'd really recommend that you go and have a look how that works in the browser. Because it's really nice if you don't know how much items, how big are your things going to be. It's really going to, it can really do very, very powerful things. Now you might say, well, to be honest, I'm fine with just a grid. It's a great tool, a visual tool to design with, to just use a standard grid, and I want to keep on using that. And you absolutely can. Under the hood, this might be set up with CSS Grid. You don't have to worry about that. So you can just recreate that. But you now know that you can also break out. There might be hero sections where you want to do something else, so you're not stuck in that system. And you can even go beyond. Like, you can do incredibly creative things with this grid. So the world is really your oyster. These things resize nicely, and you can design almost everything with this. It can also be very overwhelming when you start looking into these things, because there are too many possibilities. So sometimes taking it down a notch and just sticking to your standard systems is also quite fine. The next question you probably might have on your mind, but like, which one are we going to use now? Should I use Flexbox or should I use CSS Grid? Well, the great thing is they're part of the CSS family, so they work really hand in hand. So your components might be set up in Flexbox, but your overall layout might be a CSS Grid. This might be mixed and matched. Some areas in your design might use Flex, some might use Grid, and these days you even see something I really like, components being set up in CSS Grid, which is also really nice. The decision on how this all works, what's set up in which way, that is done by the developer. As a designer, you can't and you won't be able to do that in Figma. So it's not about mimicking the browser. You can't. You don't even have the tools. It's about really understanding what's happening, and why sometimes this idea of pixel perfect, it's not even so great, because the browser is so much more powerful. So you can use that. You can see all the possibilities that might happen in the browser. So our designer listened to that and is like, oh, thanks so much for telling me, because I was looking for how to do all of that in Figma, and I can't because I don't have a CSS Grid feature. So when I first started working with this, I was quite confused of how to approach this, and I came to the conclusion that for me, before I start a project, I look at two different things. So I first look, is this more an arty design, or is this more a sort of the artist is like the award-winning opening page, things flying around, or are we looking to create a system, a scalable design? So they have different approaches how I would look at them in my UI design. So let's take the arty one. And there's a really great example. It's also later in the resources. Jen Simmons, she's like the goddess of CSS Grid, did this fantastic page where she used old Bauhaus posters and she turned them into CSS Grid designs. So that's a static design, and all of that really happens in the browser. You cannot plan for that in Figma. The thing is, though, that you need to be aware of that. So you can't just like make a design and expect that to be developed in a few minutes. This is like a little piece of art that's happening here. So it's a very different way of working. So you really need to be very close with development. If you're working on a more systematic approach, which I think most of us do most of the time, then it's fine to use the tools you know. Use a grid, use those systems, it's absolutely fine. In Figma, that's what we can do. We can set up our components with auto layout, we can place them into a grid, use constraints, and we can even have this responsive behavior. But if you say, I think I rather want to work a little closer with development and I want to have this a pure CSS layout, this is what we discussed, then it's also fine to just have a static design. So have different screen sizes, but it's not about just designing and then just handing it off. It's about really thinking through those components. Every little bit, what's the spacing, how do they behave, what's going to happen in the background? And this also needs to be communicated and discussed. Now, if you say, for our team, it would be so great if we just had that, if we just had a tool that did Flexbox and CSS Grid, because we want to focus on doing more of those decisions in design, then I highly recommend that you have a look at Penpot. I don't like the word competitor. I don't think there is Figma or Penpot. I think they are both great and they do different things. And what Penpot really focused on is what they do is they really made these tools visual for designers. So here is their little example of their CSS grid tool. So you see you have fractional units. You really have those grid lines. You have that representation. So you can design really close to the real thing. And they also have a flex tool, which aligns almost 100%, I would say, with the real thing. And you're getting also code output that you can use. So it's a really great tool. It's free, by the way, and it's based in Europe. So you might give it a try. Okay, our project manager is back. This was all discussed. The page is looking fantastic. What could go wrong? Great. It was handed off to the client. See client feedback below. Let's have a look at the client feedback. Thank you for your work. After reviewing the design with my wife and all my cousins, even second degree, we noticed the text doesn't adjust in size across devices. Could you please make these adjustments? I've created a design in PowerPoint, so it should be easy for you to implement this. Great. We love client feedback. We all do. Keep it in the Slack channel. Okay, great. So what we need to discuss here, we need to look at breakpoints. What's happening with breakpoints? So developer, what's a breakpoint? Explain it to us. Well, a breakpoint basically is the point, as it says, where your design breaks. So where you make a decision. This could be a layout decision, positioning, showing, hiding stuff. And breakpoints in CSS, how they work with something called a media query. So you have the add media rule, and then there's a condition that has to be met, and then whatever you put in the curly brackets, if the condition is met, is going to happen. So here, very simplified example. All the developers in the room, I apologize for this example. So we have the default setting, and then as we reach a certain threshold, then our text, for example, is going to be larger. Now, if you have a traditional setup with your breakpoints and your grid system, then you're going to have a grid for every breakpoint, and that's going to be documented. And here you can make decisions of how things are placed. There are also elements that might change completely. So this is something like a navigation. So something like a burger will become a links menu. And there is typography. So this is also a good moment to adjust your typography to look good at every screen size. If you use something like a system, here a really, really old one, the Bootstrap, if you have that, then you're going to be given all of these breakpoints. If you have your own system, then also as well, usually you get these breakpoints. You can redo all of that in Figma. But what happens with Flexbox and CSS Grid? Well, strictly speaking, we sometimes don't even need breakpoints, because as you've seen, they adjust really nicely. So a lot of the time, they just do that by themselves, or the way you set it up. But there is places where you might want to have a breakpoint, so like changing a component entirely, or also your typography. So for your typography, you probably want to have some sort of scale, some sort of hierarchy, and that is something that you want to decide in design, and then you want this to be redone in your code, and you want this hierarchy to be kept. There's another really great tool in CSS, and that's called Clamp. And so what Clamp does, it works really differently. You have a min size, and then as the browser, as your screen size increases, it grows, and then you fix it to a max size. So the way this is set up in CSS, it looks like this. So you have the min size, you define the max size, and then you have this rate of scale in the middle. And so it's really important to understand that this does not rely on media queries anymore. It's like an own little closed system within itself. So our designer is looking at that and saying, OK, let me show you how that works in Figma. Let me show you what I can do and what I can't do here. So I don't have media queries or anything. If we have a traditional grid approach, then I can do that. I can set it up perfectly. That's what's always been there from the beginning. I have my different screen sizes. I have my grid styles. I put that on there, and we're done. I can set up this hierarchy. I want to decide on that hierarchy as a designer, and I can save that as styles in Figma. What I can also do is, as we saw before, I can also have these static pages, so we can discuss if we want to work with this. I would still probably want some sort of breakpoints to design my styles and to do all of this hierarchy. So we might just have these breakpoints. What you're going to notice working in Figma is that if you set up your components, then you might have one component that works for everything, so your card's going to work for everything. But what's going to happen with that changing screen size? Are you going to have 3 cards for every screen size? And what you can do now is, instead of just having styles, you can use styles, variables, and modes, and you can combine them. So what you can do, you can add modes, and to the screens, and then it's going to know which of your scale you want to use. So as you drag it onto the different frames representing your screen size, then it's going to pick up on the right style. So you just have one style, and it's going to pull in the right variable with the right size. So later I have a free little tutorial video in the resources if you're interested in how to set that up. If you say, I fell in love with Clamp, I really want to do that, well, I'm really sorry, we don't have Clamp in Figma, nor in any other tool that I know of. So what you need to do if you want to use that, you need to work very close with development. I'm not a design system expert, but if you're working in design systems, you might just not want to sort of clamp stuff all over, but you can do a nice little mix between using a scale and maybe having a headline where you add a little more effort and a little more customization to it. Okay, so we solved that. Let's look back in our Slack channel. Hi, everyone. Hello. Regarding responsive behavior, our new intern just sent me this TikTok video about container queries. Should we not be using these, like the cool new thing? Yeah, everybody gets really excited about that stuff. So let's have a look. If you were here last year, I did a whole talk about container queries. I think they're the coolest thing since sliced bread. I absolutely love them. I'm going to give you a really quick overview of what they do. So container queries, remember the media query, right? So what the media query did, it looked at the whole screen width, and then it's changing as the viewport changes. What container queries do is they look very similar, but they don't look at the viewports. They look at the parent container, so the container that holds your component. And that means that you can decide on that threshold, and on that threshold that your component has, basically, this is where you can change the design, and this is really powerful. Let me show you an example. Here you have a page, and on that page, we're using the same card component. But depending on where we place it, in the sidebar and the content, this component is always going to look different, and it's always going to look perfect depending on the size that you give it. So this is, for me, like a designer's dream come true. Like, you really always have the perfect distribution of your design. Now, as a designer, I'm looking at this, and I'm like, look, I don't even have media queries. I don't think this thing, I'm going to see that anytime soon in my design tools. But you know what? This has quite good support, so we could start planning for this, and we could do a little bit of a hacky thing here and just try it out. So the element being queried, that's the container, but the responsive information is not held there. It's held by the component. So what I could do in Figma, I could fake that a little bit, and I could use a component set with variants. And then what I could do is I could just make variants for these different breakpoints. And all I have to do, I need a little playground somewhere. And here I can have a look, and we can try out when do these components look really well, and when do I want to change them in which way. So we need to find that little threshold where they should break. And once I've found that, I can add that to my Figma file in written. And we also have an auto layout, something called min-max, so you can also fix those values. And then what we can do is, if anybody is using that, so here, let's say, here we go. If anybody is pulling out an instance, they see a random weird property called add container, and then we just need to make sure in the documentation that we explain what we're doing here and why we're doing this. Development also sees that. And so I could start planning how I want this design to look. Okay, so we're back. We finished our project. Client feedback below. We're done for the weekend. Thanks for your work, but can you make it pop more? Also, I think the logo should be bigger. There's absolutely nothing I can do for you concerning that matter. So the designers and the developers lived happily ever after. Now, 1 second, I'm not finished. So in my examples, this was a dream now. They had time, they were this team, everything was going so smoothly. But what happens if it's not the case for you? What happens if your developers don't have time? What happens if they're in another country? What happens if it just doesn't work, but you still want to learn? Then I have a great new tool for you. This is one of the tools I'm most excited about. It's called Cursor AI. It's also good you want a bit of AI in the talks here, right? Put a bit of AI in there. So what Cursor does, now I'm truly, really excited about this tool. It's really fantastic. So it is a code editor that has an LLM, so Claude or ChatGPT attached to it, so you can talk to it like you would talk to a really patient, nice developer. So if you go to the Claude website, then what you see is this, because this is obviously built for developers. So you see that sort of stuff, and you're probably like, I don't even know what that means. I understand nothing. And don't worry, I don't understand anything here either. But the cool thing about this is you don't have to use it that way. What you can do is you can just make this your own. So what you can do is say, hey, I want to set up a page. I have this idea for a page, and can you help me set it up? And what this will do, it will help you to run you through a really basic setup. So it will create some HTML for you, it creates some basic CSS for you, and then you tell it, how can I edit this? How can I change up these things? How does it work? You can highlight things and ask, what does this do? And you can jump into your Figma file, and then you can tell it, I want to change things. I want to change the typography. I want to change the setup. And you can copy from your dev mode, and you can just say, this is how I want this to be. This is my variables. Clean up everything. Show me how to clean this up. Show me how to use variables in CSS. So this is incredibly powerful. And you can even say, tell me how to make a page responsive. And you can see it's going to tell you about Flexbox. It's going to tell you about CSS Grid. It's going to tell you about these things. It's going to give you examples to play with. So I am a huge fan of this, because we're moving from handing off to understanding of, but even with tools like Cursor, as designers, it's not like you're going to take away a developer's job, but you can really work on your own projects. You became a designer to make things, and these tools are going to enable you to make things, to get back into creating a real thing and being much closer to all of that. So I hope I made it worth your while for scanning the code, and thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it.
Oh, excellent. Thank you so much. I was running a little bit and I got lost. How does that happen in a small venue like that? Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for the presentation. We have a lot of questions.
Thank you. Oh, wow.
Oh, a lot of questions.
It's always the scary part.
I would say opinionated questions.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Christine. So let's see. Well, thank you so much, everyone. So by the way, just as a quick reminder, if you want to ask a question, if you go to smash.by/Mario, you can drop in your questions right there, right? The first question was expected. Very much expected. Jennifer is wondering, Christine.
Bring it on. I'm ready. I'm ready.
Do you know why Figma is less good since the last update? It's hard to find essential information to work well, and do you know if there will be a better update coming soon? And also, Suzanne, on top of that, would it be possible, or is there a way to have a feature to switch it back to the classic look?
So yeah, the first one is, yeah, you can go back to the old UI. You just, in your design file, there's a little question mark at the bottom. You click on it and you say, go back to the old UI. And that's if you want to have that. And it doesn't change anything. Like, you still have the files. You can switch back and forth, and that works really fine. I quite like the new UI.
Do you feel like it's fine, makes sense for you, or did you?
The new UI?
Yeah.
I mean, I was saying that yesterday in the workshop. I really just don't know, because I'm using this all day long, all the time. So if they change something, you're so used to your ways. But I don't know. I think there's some quite good stuff. And what I also have to say, I mean, I'm a big Figma fan. I don't work for Figma, nor do I work for Penpot. I think they're both just really great tools. And I mean, designing a user interface for user interface designer, I can't think of a harder job in life to do. So, and I also think there was a lot of feedback from the community, and what I really appreciate about Figma is that they really open up. You can go on Twitter, you can talk to people, there's Figma advocates, and they did a lot of stuff that people said they didn't like, and they've reverted it back. So I think it's not a fixed tool, it's just a work in progress, and I'm surely there's a lot of things in the background that they're changing the tool for to prepare it for, so I'm a big fan.
Okay, good. Olivier is wondering, at some point we're implementing the UI twice, once in Figma and once in CSS, or in the code. So how far should we actually go in Figma? Question mark? And +1 from somebody as well, so somebody else cares too.
Yeah, I mean, there isn't, I haven't said it depends yet, so I'm going to say that.
No, but you can.
It depends. And it really does. The thing is, how many designers do you have? Do you have a huge design team and 2 developers that are completely overwhelmed? Do you have a huge development team that are completely bored and 1 designer? So that's, it's just a human factor in the end. And the ideal thing is obviously that you just do a quick thing in Figma, you talk to your development team, and then you see where it makes sense for you. So if you're working in a system that you're reusing, a lot of people are reusing, then I would spend a lot of time polishing those components. But if you're just a team of 4 or 5, then I would just make a quick outline. I mean, I'd still be logic about it, but I probably wouldn't spend a week cleaning all of that up. It depends a lot of the size of your team and the structure of your team.
Sure. I think it's also kind of a story where you see a lot of articles around how do we organize things in Figma, like how do we, organize the folders and the way of how we organize the structure of the files and all of that. And one question that also came up is here, related to that. How would you manage iterations and versioning within Figma, especially when working on larger projects with multiple team members?
Oh yeah, it's a really tricky one. I think last year someone already asked that, is if you're on the enterprise plan, I think it's the enterprise plan, then you have version control in Figma. So I would look into version control and use that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, makes sense. It's funny because I think that I kind of have this as a moment of truth at this point. Does anybody feel maybe a little bit stuck in Adobe XD? Okay, well, maybe 7 or 8 people. For different reasons, you could not, for a while, get into Figma, and maybe now you can move from Adobe XD to Figma. What would it actually look like if you move to Figma from something that you already have? Maybe, again, some people want to move from Figma to PenPot, or from PenPot to Figma. This transition is always really tricky, especially if you have like a whole design system built up in Adobe XD. So what do you think would be, or could be a good transition? From one to another.
It's a huge investment. So I think most people did the transition to Figma because it is the market leader. It's the largest one. It's the most promising one. So PenPot, it's obviously much smaller. So it's usually more. I personally would use PenPot right now more for like if I have a small project, a one-off project, like a freelance project. Mm-hmm. But if I'm working on a big scale system, then I would rely on Figma. But that's my personal approach to it. Migrating from Figma to PenPot, I wouldn't, but if you like migrating from another tool to Figma, then there are plugins to do that. They work all right, but you just have to schedule a lot of time of cleaning up. And I think a good moment is when you have sort of a break point in your project, when you say like, we're entering a new phase, we're doing a whole new branding or something like that. I wouldn't like in the middle of a project for no reason, just because you like the tool better, is a huge investment. So you can also do it over time, migrate bit by bit. So there are different strategies how you could approach that. Yeah,
it's also funny because every now and again, I feel like designers are being seen by management as needy people. Sorry, everyone. Like, always need to switch this. Just do the design, just move these pixels around. Why do we need now to think about the procurement for Figma for the entire organization? This is like a whole story. And then we need this and we need that. Can you just do design? It often feels like, and then there is Framer, and then there are all these other tools around as well. And so it's always kind of a little bit weird there. I think also one thing that came up by Michael, and that's kind of true, we often think about engineers being kind of very code savvy and kind of really investing time into it. But Michael is saying or asking, many JavaScript developers are not really astute or familiar with modern CSS features. CSS, to many of them in my experience, feel like a design tool. How do we help them understand and appreciate this technology as a designer?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the ideal thing is I'm a big fan of what PenPot is doing, because I like that they're bringing this thing in, and it's true, like CSS for a developer, it's not so much the logic, the thing, it's really sort of a very systematic thing that is true. I also think it belongs to design, but it sort of doesn't fit there either. So I love the approach that PenPot is doing, because like the example I showed you with the CSS grid, they made a really good user interface of the CSS tool, aligning really perfectly with it. And that for me is something of making that transition, making it really user-friendly for the designer, but aligning in with code, because then you get a code output that you can actually use and you're not right, because you're constantly doing, it's true, you're doing the work twice. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm a big fan of watching what's happening there with PenPot.
Sure. At which point would you actually start moving towards the browser to make design decisions there? I mean, it's a very broad question, of course, but I mean, at some point you start designing and you have this freedom to actually quickly iterate and figure out what you want to do, what the layout should be, and so on. But then eventually, probably some of the final decisions will need to be made within the browser. But then for that, you need to have either the prototype or something that's cursor AI generated or something similar. How does this transition look like, and when do you move?
So I'm going to tell you from rather the experience of when I'm working on a small own project, rather than, because again with the companies and teams I'm giving you all those depend things which are not very valid.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
but if I'm working on my own little projects, then what I do, I still design in Figma, because as I said, the browser's you can't drag stuff around, you can't make these hierarchies quickly. So I design in Figma, but what I do, I design a static page, some basic components, but not even that deep. And then, so what you saw in the example is what I do. I jump right into Cursor now, and I'm not a developer, but I just start, you become really fast with Cursor. And it's so easy, Cursor. It's like that you get an idea. My 8-year-old son sat down one afternoon and was bored, and I showed him Cursor, and he created an app with his favorite books on Cursor. It's incredible how simple it is to enter coding, and it's proper code. And so I would do that, because then I can see, as soon as I want to see how things behave, I personally prefer going to the browser. All the design, the layout decision, the colors, the hierarchy, all of that, I do in Figma. But all the behavior, I prefer personally looking at that in the browser.
But then also building up on top of that, there is a question from Andreas, which is kind of neatly fits into this. When do you switch from designing free, like literally playing, experimenting, and so on, to tidying up, adding components, variables, and so on? We often do it too early and have not enough communication to developers, and need more time later because we have so many dependencies in Figma.
Yeah, we had that discussion yesterday in the workshop. So I am a big fan of allowing yourself this creative space in Figma. And what I do, I have, in the project files, I always have a page that I call Playground, because I think it's so important, and with these features are so powerful, and a lot of time, also when you put stuff out on social media, people go, it's just a tool, it's like, yeah, it's just a tool, but there's two parts of your design. There's just a tool, and but that tool you need to facilitate the building, and then there's your creativity. They need to work together. So I have like a page that I call Playground, and there I drag ideas. It's really messy. I detach components. Only on that area.
You detach components?
Only on my playground area, because nobody's
We don't judge
supposed to
here.
go in
This is
there.
a very safe space.
No, only
That's
there.
okay.
But sometimes you need to like, you want to do all of that stuff. And then I have my design where I allow, and trust me, that playground is like rigidly like marked.
I fully trust you on that. No worries.
Trust me. And then I have the design where I clearly mark, this is where everybody goes in. So when we go in that, this is where the system lives, this is where the clean stuff lives. But you need your designer. Like you can't just live with those systems. I like design systems, but sometimes we become so obsessed with the system that we forget about the design. And the system is there to help me design and not the other way around.
So maybe a final question just to wrap up. Do you have a sort of a Figma wish list feature where you think, oh, if only Figma had that?
Well, all I showed you today.
Yeah, all of that.
Well, I would like to see the implementation of layout tools to do that thing that Penpot is doing. Sorry, Penpot, might also not be too nice for them. But another thing is like small little stuff like locking aspect ratio and things. But as I said, I really love Figma for being so open. So you can see that on Twitter, on LinkedIn, they're asking like, what features do you want? What do you think about that? How do you work? It's not a closed up company. They're really open to asking you the things that you need. And it's just about what people want. And also one important point to make, which I didn't mention, is I talk about the browser and I like designing for the browser, but not all design is for the browser. So maybe if your main target group is working on mobile designs, then for iOS, this is irrelevant for you. You don't have a CSS grid, you don't have Flexbox. So it also depends who is the target group that what you're working for.
Sounds wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Christine,
you
for
very
being
much.
us. So please, round of applause to Christine, everyone.
Thank you.